by the true prophets against the false prophets that is a fire. And yet others say the fire is love. Christ came to send the fire of love on the earth, because love is like pure and holy fire. Now it's true that the image of fire is used for all four of those things, but the problem with all four of those options is that they don't really fit the context. Instead, by fire here is meant the fire of trouble, affliction, and distress. We sang Psalm 66 verse 12 earlier, which states that we went through fire and water. And the previous verse, verse 11, gives us a synonymous idea. Thou hast sent affliction upon our loins. We went through fire. Affliction and fire, the same thing in that verse. Isaiah 43 verse 2 is similar. When thou walkest through the fire, thou shalt not be burned. The fires of affliction and distress. Now Jesus states in verse 49, I am come to send fire. And in the Bible, the sending of fire, and not just the word fire, the sending of fire is also described as sending hardship and afflictions. Jeremiah said, upon the fall of Jerusalem, in Lamentations 1 verse 13, that God sent fire into his bones. In other places of the Old Testament, God sent fire upon Magog, Ezekiel 39, the cities of Israel, Hosea 8 verse 14, and various other places in Amos chapters 1 and 2. So fire means afflictions in various passages, and the sending of fire means the sending of afflictions and hardships. So that proves that the word and the phrase, the sending of fire, can mean that. The proof comes from the context. Verse 49, I am come to send fire on the earth. Verse 51 puts it in a slightly different form. Suppose ye that I am come to give peace on earth, I tell you, nay, but rather division. Both verses tell us what Christ came to do. In verse 49 it's sending fire, in verse 51 it's sending division. And putting it all together, verses 48, 49 and 51, Christ came to send the fire of division, which is then illustrated, the fires of division, in verses 52 and 53, which we'll look at later. And not just the context, but the parallel passage assures us that this is the correct view. Back to Matthew 10:34 again. Think not that I am come to send peace on earth. I came not to send peace, but a sword. And the next few verses in Matthew 10 treat divisions in the home. So the trouble, affliction, and distress of division between unbeliever and believer is called fire in Luke chapter 12, and a sword in Matthew chapter 10. Why the imagery of fire though? I am come to send fire on the earth. And we need to understand, therefore, what does fire do? Fire, and I'm giving you no great revelation here, fire burns up and thereby destroys things. Fire consumes and ruins things. And here the things that fire destroys and ruins are some earthly relationships and friendships. And since fire destroys, fire brings loss and pain and distress. Maybe you have seen a man whose house or business has been burnt to the ground through a forest fire like in Australia or California, or arson. And look at what it has done to that person. Loss, pain, distress. You've maybe seen people or know people who've been afflicted in that way, or even seen them on the news. Here's Mr. So-and-so, and his house has been burnt down and everything in it. Well, the loss and pain and distress of fire in our text comes through the ruining of various earthly relationships and friendships. And the believer knows something of this in his own life. And as you sit here, your brothers and sisters in this room know something of this too. And this is the common experience of the people of God in all the world. Because fiery trouble and fiery affliction have always and will always characterize the presence of the gospel. Where you have gospel, there you have fiery loss and destruction and misery. You could even characterize the book of Acts as the story of this. You have the church persecuted in Jerusalem and wherever it's established, and then if you follow the first and second and third missionary journeys of the Apostle Paul, you can see in his wake comes fire. Fires coming through Turkey, fires coming through Greece, as we now call them, where he and the believers and the church that is gathered there experiences earthly hardship for the gospel's sake. In the post-apostolic church, the early church, the church in the Roman Empire, it was no different. And the fires of persecution spread with the gospel throughout that mighty empire. In the Middle Ages, the Reformation, and afterwards, Christians were burned alive. The metaphor of fire sometimes even becomes literal fire. It did that for Jan Hus in Constance in Germany, or William Tyndale in Vilvoorde in Belgium, or Robert Farrar in Carmarthen in Wales. I am come to send fire on the earth. This fire divided, at the Reformation, it divided Western Europe into Roman Catholic and Protestant, to stick to the main division at that time. And wherever the biblical and Protestant gospel and church has gone, this fire has necessarily come too. You can't have one, the gospel, without the other, the fire. Jesus says, I am come to send fire on the earth, all over the earth. Because fire not only brings loss and distress, fire also advances and spreads. And this naturally strikes us as a terrible and a sad thing. But there are three more things from the first half of verse 49 that make this even more awe-inspiring. I'm thinking of the first word of the text, I, at least as it appears here in our English version. I am come to send fire on the earth. And this teaches us that it's Christ who sends this trouble, affliction, and distress on the earth. Christ does this personally. I am come to send fire on this earth. He does this by his grace in saving his people. He does this by his providence in decreeing and governing the wicked response of the ungodly to his gospel and to his church, so that there is division, antipathy, and warfare between them. I am come to send fire on the earth. Christ personally does that, always. And if you look at the second and third words of our English text and emphasize them, for the second point, I am come to send fire on the earth. In other words,